Ants in their pants. One day, Mrs. Lyric had a full lesson planned with songs that had dance moves when I walked into the music room. Mrs. Timely's class grew wild with excitement as they learned the songs and the groovy moves. I left before the class ended to go observe another class. I'm glad I left before the last song because I have a feeling it caused a catastrophe at Jolly Elementary that day. I passed Mrs. Timely, who was already on her way to pick up her class. Mrs. Lyric knew Mrs. Timely would not be late, so she warned the students that the end of the class was approaching. Mrs. Lyric noticed that although the students got quiet, they could not stop dancing. Mrs. Timely, however, rushed the students out of the classroom because she felt that she would run out of time for her next subject. Since she saw the other class struggle to settle down at the end of the last class, Mrs. Lyric decided to reverse the song order in her lesson. Not long after Mrs. Lyric started the same lesson for Mrs. Lullaby's class, she received a phone call from Mrs. Timely. "What have you done to my students?" Mrs. Timely asked. "I cannot get them to stop dancing." Mrs. Lyric responded that she was not sure, but that she would be right there. She asked the students in Mrs. Lullaby's class to calm down and come with her to Mrs. Timely's class. Mrs. Lullaby's class got quiet, but they were not able to stop dancing. Mrs. Lyric started to panic and called for me in the front office. I rushed down to the first grade hall to see what was happening. The first graders were all in a stir when I arrived, dancing as if they had ants in their pants. Mrs. Timely was frazzled about her schedule. Mrs. Lullaby looked confused, and Mrs. Lyric worried because she felt she caused all the chaos. Thinking quickly, I ordered Mrs. Lyric to cancel music class for the rest of the day. "Mrs. Lullaby," I asked, "your voice is soft and sweet. Do you mind singing a lullaby?" "Oh, yes," Mrs. Lullaby responded, looking at little Rudy Boogie, who was spinning on the floor. "Anything to calm them down," said Mrs. Lullaby. After gathering the little dancers in the cafeteria, Mrs. Lullaby began to sing. I was so happy to see that the students started to fall asleep at the sound of Mrs. Lullaby's sweet voice. The teachers waited for 2 minutes before awakening the students. "It worked!" shouted Mrs. Lyric. When Mrs. Lyric got back to her classroom, she decided to throw the disc of songs out. Mrs. Lyric thought to herself, "I hope no other music teacher has the same disc." Figurative language lesson. In life, examples of figurative language are used to make our writing and conversations interesting. In fact, people use figurative language phrases so much that they are now part of the way that we speak. Many examples of figurative language can be found in this chapter. One example is the phrase, "ants in their pants." Does this really mean that they have ants in their pants? The phrase really means the students cannot stop moving. See if you can find some other examples of figurative language.